Part 1. The Land of the Rising Sun. Origins and Myths. Long before there were samurai and shoguns, long before the great cities of Kyoto and Edo rose, there were only the islands, drifting in a vast ocean, half hidden in mist. The Japanese call their land Nihon, or Nippon, the origin of the sun. To the rest of the world, it is known as Japan. The myths tell of a time before time, when the world was chaos, neither sky nor sea, but a shapeless void. From that void, two divine beings appeared, Izanagi and Izanami. They stood upon the bridge of heaven, looking down at the swirling waters below. With a jeweled spear, they stirred the sea. As they lifted the spear, drops fell back and hardened into land. Thus was born the first island, and with it, the beginning of Japan. Izanagi and Izanami descended to this newborn earth, where they joined as husband and wife. From their union came the islands of the Japanese archipelago, one after another, stretching like pearls across the ocean. They gave life to rivers and mountains, trees and winds. Yet tragedy followed, for Izanami, the goddess, died, giving birth to the god of fire. Heartbroken, Izanagi journeyed into the underworld to bring her back, but he found only shadows and decay. Terrified, he fled, sealing the path with a great boulder. From his grief and cleansing came new gods, and among them the most radiant of all, Amaterasu, the sun goddess. She shone with such brilliance that the heavens themselves glowed. To her descendants, it was said, belonged the right to rule Japan. Even today, the Japanese emperor traces his divine line to Amaterasu, the eternal sun. But the sun, too, had shadows. There was Susanoo, the storm god, fierce and unpredictable, and Tsukuyomi, the moon. The myths of their quarrels shaped the rhythm of nature, day and night, calm and storm, light and darkness. These stories were more than tales. To the people of ancient Japan, they were the bones of the world, explaining why the land existed, why the sun rose first upon their islands, why the emperor himself was divine. Each shrine, each ritual, each whisper of prayer carried echoes of Izanagi's spear and Amaterasu's light. And so, Japan began, not with kings or warriors, but with gods and myths. A land born from sea foam and divine sorrow, destined always to be the place where the sun rises first. Part 2. Early Japan, Jomon, Yayoi, and Kofun eras. Long before the rise of emperors, before the first palaces of Kyoto, the Japanese islands were home to ancient peoples whose lives were shaped by the forests, seas, and mountains. Their footsteps echo faintly still, like whispers beneath the soil. The first of these were the Jomon people, beginning more than 10,000 years ago. They were hunters and gatherers, living in harmony with the deep forests and rivers. They built pit dwellings, simple homes dug into the earth, warmed by fire. They fished in rivers and seas, hunted deer and wild boar, and gathered nuts and berries. Yet their greatest gift to memory was their pottery. The vessels of the Jomon are among the oldest in the world, coiled with ropes pressed into clay, swirling with patterns like flames. To hold one is to touch the imagination of a people who saw beauty even in the everyday act of storing food. Perhaps they believed their pots had spirits,
for every pattern seemed alive, curling like smoke or twisting like roots in the dark earth. Then, around the 3rd century BCE, a new people came across the seas from the Asian mainland. They brought with them rice, and with rice came transformation. These were the Yayoi. They settled the fertile plains, irrigated the land, and built villages that hummed with the rhythm of planting and harvest. With rice came surpluses, and with surpluses came wealth, power, and conflict. The Yayoi brought also bronze and iron. Bronze bells, dotaku, rang in ritual fields, calling upon the gods for good harvests. Iron swords and tools changed warfare and farming alike. Slowly, society grew more stratified. Leaders emerged, clans grew powerful, and the seeds of kingdoms were sown. By the 3rd century CE, the age of the Kofun had begun. Its name means old mounds, for across Japan rose colossal tombs, great earthen keyhole-shaped mounds surrounded by moots, some stretching hundreds of meters in length. Within them lay the remains of powerful rulers, buried with armor, swords, and haniwa, clay figures of warriors, horses, dancers, and guardians, set upon the tombs like silent sentinels. The Kofun Age was a time of kings and warriors, a time when clans vied for dominance. From among them rose the Yamato clan, whose rulers would claim descent from Amaterasu herself. They would lay the foundations of what became the imperial line, a dynasty that, in name at least, continues unbroken to this day. So the story of early Japan is one of transformation, from the hunters of the forests to the rice farmers of the Yayoi plains to the mighty rulers of the Kofun tombs. Each era layered upon the last, like waves upon the shore, shaping the land and the people who would one day call themselves Japanese.
Part 3. The Imperial Line and the Dawn of Nara. As the Kofun mounds rose and the Yamato clan gathered power, a new idea began to take shape on the islands of Japan, the idea of a divine ruler, whose blood was not only human but heavenly. According to legend, the Yamato traced their ancestry to Amaterasu, the radiant sun goddess. From her line came Ninigi no Mikoto, who descended from heaven bearing the mirror, the jewel, and the sword, 3 sacred treasures that would forever symbolize imperial rule. His descendants became the first emperors, rulers not only of men, but of the balance between heaven and earth. By the 6th century, the Yamato court grew stronger. Their rulers gathered tribute, forged alliances, and reached across the sea to Korea and China. And from these lands came new ideas, flowing like waves into Japan: writing, Buddhism, Confucian thought, new styles of art and government. The islands were no longer isolated. They were part of the great currents of Asia. In the 8th century, a bold step was taken. A permanent capital was established in Nara, modeled on the Chinese city of Chang'an. Wide avenues, orderly blocks, and grand palaces rose from what had once been farmland. For the first time, Japan had a city that seemed to embody the permanence of power. In Nara, temples flourished. The most magnificent of all was Todai-ji, built to house the great Buddha, a towering bronze figure that gleamed in the light, his gaze serene, his hand raised in eternal blessing. To cast such a statue required the efforts of thousands, the wealth of a nation, the devotion of an empire. When it was unveiled, the people believed that the very presence of Buddha had entered their land. Yet Nara was not only a place of faith, it was also a place of politics, intrigue, and power. Noble families struggled for influence, monasteries grew wealthy and strong, and the emperor's role was caught between divine symbol and mortal ruler. Even then, you could feel the tension that would define Japanese history, the balance between the spiritual and the earthly, between the emperor's sacred place and the realities of power. But in Nara, the dream of a unified Japan, ruled by one divine line, became tangible. The emperors looked back to the myths of Amaterasu and forward to a land that was slowly weaving its own identity, neither wholly Chinese nor wholly its own, but something in between, something destined to shine in its own light.
Part 4. Heian Era, the world of courtly elegance. In the year 794, the capital moved once more, from Nara to a place that would become legendary, Heian-kyo, the capital of peace and tranquility. Today, it is known as Kyoto. Here began the Heian period, an age not of warriors, but of elegance. The emperors still ruled in name, yet true power began to flow through the noble families, especially the mighty Fujiwara clan. They married their daughters to emperors, became regents, and turned the court into a world of intrigue and refined ritual. Life in Heian was like a dream woven of silk and fragrance. The nobles lived in palaces of painted screens and gardens of cherry blossoms, their days filled with poetry, music, and games. Every detail mattered. The cut of a robe, the scent of incense, the calligraphy of a letter. A misplaced word, a poorly chosen color, could bring ruin to one's reputation. It was during this age that literature blossomed. Court ladies, often secluded behind screens, poured their feelings into words that would outlast empires. Murasaki Shikubi, a lady-in-waiting, wrote The Tale of Genji, a masterpiece often called the world's first novel. In it, she captured the romance, sorrow, and beauty of courtly life, a world where every glance and gesture carried the weight of destiny. Religion, too, took root in new ways. Buddhism spread through the land, mixing with ancient Shinto beliefs. The aristocrats built temples of breathtaking grace, where monks chanted sutras by lantern light, while outside, the night air filled with the hum of insects and the fragrance of pine. And yet, beneath this elegance, cracks began to form. While the nobles of Heian lived in a dream of beauty and verse, far beyond the capital, the provinces grew restless. Landholders armed themselves. Bands of warriors began to appear, in protecting estates, enforcing justice by the sword. In time, these warriors would rise to power, bringing an end to the delicate dream of Heian. But for centuries, Heian remained the golden age of courtly refinement. Even now, the beauty of Kyoto's gardens and temples carries whispers of that era, when the world of Japan seemed less a battlefield and more a poem.
Part 5. The Rise of the Samurai. As the courtiers of Heian drifted deeper into their world of poetry and perfumes, beyond the capital, another force was awakening. In the provinces, where rice fields stretched beneath mountains and rivers, power no longer belonged only to nobles in Kyoto. It belonged to those who could protect the land and take it by the sword. These were the bushi, the warriors. At first, they were hired by aristocrats and monasteries to guard estates, collect taxes, and defend borders. But in time, they began to serve themselves. They trained in archery and swordsmanship, rode swift horses, and lived by honor and loyalty to their clan. From these beginnings rose a new class, the samurai. The samurai were more than fighters. They embodied a way of life. They prized loyalty to their lord above all, and courage in the face of death. To retreat was shame. To betray was unforgivable. Their armor gleamed with lacquered plates, their helmets adorned with horns and crests, their bows long and powerful. And at their side, always, was the sword. Not only a weapon, but a soul. At first, they were bound to great families, such as the Taira and the Minamoto, clans that would one day clash for the fate of the nation. The Heian court still wrote poems, but the provinces whispered of battles, raids, and rivalries. The age of elegance was giving way to an age of war. Yet the samurai were not only warriors of blood, they also became warriors of spirit. From Buddhism, they absorbed the teachings of impermanence, that life is fleeting, like cherry blossoms falling in the spring wind. Death was not to be feared, but embraced with dignity. To die well was as important as to live well. In the quiet of the provinces, as the cherry blossoms drifted down upon the rivers, the samurai sharpened their swords and waited. Their time had not yet fully come, but already the balance of power was shifting. Soon, the court in Kyoto would learn that poems and incense could not stop steel. The warriors of the provinces would rise, and once they had tasted power, they would never let it go.
Part 6. Kamakura Shogunate, Rule of the Warriors. The 12th century was an age of storms. The great clans of the provinces grew restless, and the court in Kyoto could no longer contain their rivalries. The most powerful among them were the Taira and the Minamoto. Their quarrel became legend, their battles sung by storytellers as the Heiki Monogatari, or the Tale of the Heiki. It was a story of loyalty and betrayal, of valor and tragedy. The Taira, proud and wealthy, held sway over the court, their warriors glittering in silk and armor. The Minamoto, hardened by exile and loss, waited for their chance to strike. When war came, it shook the land. Samurai clashed by rivers and mountains, their banners fluttering like wings of ravens. The final battle at Danonura in 1185 ended with the Taira's defeat. Their last child emperor was carried into the sea by his grandmother, vanishing beneath the waves as if the ocean itself had claimed the clan's pride. From this storm emerged the leader of the Minamoto, Minamoto no Yoritomo. Yet he did not rule from Kyoto's court. Instead, he established his power far to the east in a small coastal town, Kamakura. Here, in 1192, he took the title of Shogun, the supreme commander of Japan's warriors. This was the birth of the Kamakura Shogunate, the first warrior government. The emperor still sat upon his throne in Kyoto, cloaked in divine authority, but true power now rested in the hands of the shogun and his samurai. The age of warriors had begun. Under the Kamakura Shogunate, Japan faced its greatest external threat. Across the sea, the Mongols had conquered vast empires and now turned their gaze to the islands. Twice they came, in 1274 and 1281, bringing fleets of ships and thousands of warriors. The samurai fought bravely, yet the odds were impossible. And then, the winds came. Typhoons swept across the sea, scattering the Mongol ships, wrecking them upon the shores. The Japanese called it kamikaze, the divine wind. They believed the gods themselves had protected their land. The Mongols never returned. But even divine winds could not calm the storms within. The shogunate grew weak, torn by corruption and rebellion. By the 14th century, new powers were rising, ready to challenge Kamakura's hold. And so, the age of the first shoguns drew to a close, leaving behind a legacy of warriors, storms, and the belief that the gods themselves watched over the islands of the rising sun.
Part 7. The Age of Warring States, Sengoku Jidai. The 14th and 15th centuries shattered Japan into fragments. The emperor in Kyoto held little more than ceremony. The shogun in name was weak, and across the land powerful warlords, daimyo, carved their own realms from blood and fire. This was the Sengoku Jidai, the age of warring states. Castles rose upon mountains, rivers turned red with battle, and alliances shifted like shadows in the wind. For nearly a century and a half, Japan was torn by endless wars, each lord seeking to unite the land under his banner. In this world, the samurai thrived, bound by loyalty, yet ever tested by ambition. They lived and died for their daimyo, charging into battle beneath banners painted with clan symbols. The clash of steel, the thunder of arquebuses, brought later by the Portuguese, and the smoke of burning villages, these became the rhythm of the age. Out of this chaos rose three men, remembered as the great unifiers of Japan. First was Oda Nobunaga, fierce and ruthless. He used cunning strategy and embraced the new weapons of gunpowder, crushing his enemies with fire and iron. His ambition knew no bounds, yet betrayal struck him down, burned alive by one of his own generals. Next came Toyotomi Hideyoshi, once a peasant, who rose by wit and loyalty to become master of Japan. He completed much of Nobunaga's conquest, uniting the fractured clans beneath his rule. Hideyoshi dreamed of greater glory still, even launching invasions across the sea into Korea. But death claimed him before his dreams were fulfilled. And finally, Tokugawa Ieyasu, patient and calculating. At the great battle of Sekigahara in 1600, his forces crushed their rivals. From the smoke and silence of that battlefield, Tokugawa emerged as the victor who would bring centuries of war to an end. The Sengoku Jidai was an age of fire and chaos, of betrayal and ambition, but also of heroes whose names still echo through Japanese history. From its storms would rise a new order, one of peace, isolation, and the iron rule of the Tokugawa.
Part 8. The Tokugawa Shogunate, Peace and Isolation. After centuries of war, the land lay weary. Villages smoldered, castles crumbled, and the people longed for peace. It was then that Tokugawa Ieyasu, the cautious victor of Sekigahara, claimed the title of shogun in 1603. His rule began an age that would last more than 250 years, the Tokugawa Shogunate, or the Edo period. From his new capital in Edo, the city that would one day be called Tokyo, Ieyasu and his descendants ruled Japan with patience and iron. The emperor remained in Kyoto, cloaked in divine tradition, but the shogun's word carried the power of law. To ensure loyalty, the Tokugawa imposed strict order. The daimyo were bound to the system of Sankin Kotai. They had to spend every other year in Edo, leaving their families behind as hostages when they returned to their domains. Roads bustled with processions of lords, their retainers in long lines, banners flying, armor gleaming, a theater of obedience. The samurai, once warriors of endless battles, found themselves in a new role. With peace, their swords were rarely drawn. They became administrators, scholars, and bureaucrats, living stipends rather than plunder. Yet they clung to the Bushido, the way of the warrior, a code of honor, loyalty, and discipline that defined their very souls. The Tokugawa also turned Japan inward. Foreigners were expelled, Christianity banned, and trade tightly controlled. Only a few Dutch and Chinese merchants were allowed in Nagasaki, confined to a small island called Dejima. For over 2 centuries, Japan lived in Sakoku, closed country, sealed from the storms of the outside world. Yet within these walls of peace, culture flourished. Edo became a city of 1 million souls, its streets alive with merchants, artisans, and performers. The ukiyo, the floating world, gave rise to kabuki theater, woodblock prints of courtesans and landscapes, and the haiku poetry of masters like Matsuo Basho, who wandered the land, capturing eternity in 17 syllables. Peace was heavy, orderly, unyielding, but it allowed art, commerce, and beauty to bloom. While the world beyond Japan was convulsed by empires and revolutions, The islands of the rising sun dreamed within their walls of stone and silence. But even silence cannot last forever. Beyond the seas, ships with black smoke and iron guns waited, and soon they would come to the shores of Edo, shaking the Tokugawa world to its core.
Part 9. The World of the Samurai. For centuries, the samurai had lived by the sword, their lives bound to the chaos of war. But under the Tokugawa shogunate, peace stretched on and on. With no great battles to fight, the warriors found themselves in a strange new role, guardians of order, symbols of loyalty, living relics of an age of blood. Yet the samurai spirit did not vanish. It was preserved in a code, Bushido, the way of the warrior. Bushido taught loyalty unto death, courage in the face of hopeless odds, self-discipline sharper than the edge of a blade. Honor was life itself. To live dishonorably was a fate worse than death. At the heart of this world was the sword, not just a weapon, but a soul. The katana was forged with fire and folded steel, its edge said to be as perfect as a moonlit line upon the water. Samurai polished their blades with reverence, believing the spirit of their ancestors dwelt within the steel. When honor was lost, there remained only one path, seppuku. With calm ritual, the samurai would cut open his own belly, offering his life to cleanse shame, to prove loyalty, to preserve dignity. To outsiders, it seemed a horror. To the samurai, it was the truest expression of their way. But not all samurai served great lords. Some became ronin, masterless men, wandering the land. Some turned mercenary, others lived in poverty, and a few became legends. The tale of the 47 ronin is remembered above all, loyal retainers who avenged their fallen master, even knowing it would cost them their lives. Their story became a symbol of loyalty, sacrifice, and the eternal heart of the warrior. And in quieter times, the samurai turned to study. Many became poets, painters, or teachers of martial arts. They practiced Zen meditation, finding in silence the same discipline they once found in war. In gardens and temples, they sought balance, the stillness of mind that could guide the strike of a sword. Thus, the world of the samurai was more than battle. It was a philosophy, a discipline, a way of being. Even in peace, their spirit lived in every bow, every verse, every quiet step upon the tatami mats. And though the age of the samurai would one day pass, their legacy would remain, carved not only in steel, but in the soul of Japan itself.
Part 10. The Fall of the Shoguns. Arrival of the Black Ships. For over 2 centuries, Japan had lived in seclusion, its gates closed to the outside world. The Tokugawa shogunate ruled with rigid order, and the islands dreamed within their walls of peace. But across the oceans, the world was changing. Empires rose, machines roared, and ships of iron and smoke cut through the seas. In the summer of 1853, they came. 4 great American warships, their hulls black with coal smoke, their cannons gleaming, entered Edo Bay. The Japanese called them the Black Ships. At their head was Commodore Matthew Perry, carrying demands from the United States. Japan must open its ports or face the fire of modern guns. For the samurai who watched from the shores, it was as if monsters had risen from the sea. Their own ships were small and fragile, their matchlock guns centuries old. Against the Black Ships, they were powerless. The divine winds of the Mongol invasions did not come. This time, there was no kamikaze.
The shogunate yielded. Treaties were signed, ports opened, foreign merchants entered. Yet with them came humiliation, unequal agreements, foreign privileges, and the bitter truth that Japan had fallen behind. Discontent spread like wildfire. Samurai, merchants, and peasants alike questioned the shogunate's weakness. The cry of "Sono Joi," revere the emperor, expel the barbarians, echoed across the land. In Kyoto, the emperor, long a shadow in politics, suddenly became the symbol of resistance and renewal. The Tokugawa, once unshakable, now wavered. Their authority crumbled under the weight of foreign pressure and domestic unrest. Domains like Satsuma and Choshu rose in defiance, their leaders dreaming of a new order. The age of the shoguns, which had endured for centuries, was drawing to its end. From the smoke of the black ships, a new Japan would rise, forged in fire, modern, restless, and yet still bound to the spirit of the rising sun.
Part 11. The New Japan. From Empire to Modern Age. The black ships had torn open Japan's gates, and from the wound poured change. The old Tokugawa order collapsed, and in its place came a revolution. In 1868, power was formally restored to the emperor, a young boy named Mutsuhito, who would take the name Meiji, meaning enlightened rule. Thus began the Meiji Restoration, not merely the return of an emperor, but the rebirth of a nation. The cry was simple: Fukoku Kyohei, enrich the country, strengthen the army. Samurai cut off their topknots and donned Western suits. Castles gave way to railroads, silk robes to uniforms, rice stipends to salaries. Schools spread across the land, teaching science, engineering, and foreign languages. The printing press carried new ideas. Factories filled the air with smoke. Japan, once secluded, raced to catch the modern world. Yet change brought pain. The samurai, stripped of their ancient privileges, rose in protest. In 1877, the last great rebellion erupted, led by Saigo Takamori, a man remembered as the last true samurai. His warriors fought bravely, swords against rifles and cannon, but the new imperial army crushed them. The old ways died upon the battlefield. By the dawn of the 20th century, Japan had transformed. No longer a land of isolation, it had become an empire. It defeated China in 1895, then Russia in 1905, a shock to the world, for never before had an Asian nation humbled a European power. Japan's empire stretched across Korea, Taiwan, and beyond. But with ambition came shadows. The same fires that fueled progress also burned toward war. In the 20th century, Japan's path would lead to devastation. A war across Asia, the destruction of cities, the atomic fire of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Out of that darkness, however, Japan rose again, rebuilding itself as a nation of peace, technology, and culture. From swords to steam engines, from wooden castles to neon towers, Japan had journeyed farther than its ancestors could have dreamed. Yet through every change, the spirit of the rising sun remained, resilient, enduring, eternal. Part 12. Closing Reflections. The Eternal Rising Sun. The story of Japan is a tale of cycles, of birth and rebirth, of tradition and change. From islands born in myth, stirred from the sea by divine hands, to an empire that stretched across oceans, to a modern nation of towers and trains, Japan has carried with it the spirit of the rising sun.
Through the centuries, the Japanese people have endured war and peace, famine and abundance, silence and storm. They have seen their world transformed again and again, yet always they return to their roots, the cherry blossoms that bloom and fall each spring, the shrines that stand quietly in forests, the reverence for ancestors who still walk in memory. The samurai are gone, their swords resting in museums and shrines, yet their spirit lingers. Bushido, the way of honor and discipline, breathes still in Japanese art, in duty, in the quiet persistence of a people who refuse to be broken. The emperors, once divine rulers, now reign in symbol only. Yet their presence, unbroken across millennia, links the present to the dawn of myth, a reminder of Amaterasu's light, of the first spears stirring the sea. Today, Japan shines as both ancient and new. Neon lights blaze in Tokyo, yet pilgrims still climb Mount Fuji in silence. Bullet trains race across the land, yet in Kyoto's gardens, stillness reigns. The modern and the eternal walk side by side, like the sun and the moon sharing the sky. And so, as night falls, imagine the land of the rising sun. Picture the mountains wrapped in mist, the waves rolling upon quiet shores, the lanterns glowing in temples where monks chant softly in the dark. Above it all, the sun waits, eternal, patient, ready to rise again. For Japan is more than an island nation. It is a dream woven from myth, battle, and beauty, a dream that endures as eternal as the rising sun.